There's no doubt about it, Assassin's Creed has changed. What was originally a highly scripted stealth franchise has become a highly derivative RPG power fantasy. And I, for one, like it significantly better this way. With the release of Assassin's Creed Valhalla just a few months away, I've noticed more and more people complaining about what the series has become, while venerating what the series was before. So I figured I'd explain why I have the exact opposite opinion. Here are my top 5 reasons I prefer the new direction of Assassin's Creed. One of the biggest issues I had with the early entries in the series is that I personally found combat to be quite boring. Enemies attack the player one by one like extras in a B-movie, and taking them out was often as easy as pressing 2 buttons. Literally, all I'm doing right here is pressing counter, then attack. Edward does all the rest. To me, it felt like Ubisoft was pandering to players who'd never held a controller before. Origins ditched the idea of only targeting one enemy at a time in favor of a hitbox system. The devs also added a lock-on mechanic, assigned both light and heavy attacks to the shoulder buttons so players have full control over the camera, and gave each enemy type a unique moveset, much like From Software's Soulsborne games. In Odyssey, the devs went back to a universal parry mechanic, but they turned it into a crowd-controlled device and removed the ability to block, kind of like the Batman Arkham games. This creates what is, in my opinion, the surf and turf of video game melee combat, 2 of the greatest mechanics from the previous generation finally working together seamlessly. My only critique of the new combat system is that it's still more forgiving than most games. Parry windows last for ages, you can break most enemy guard with just a single heavy attack, and most enemy attacks come with a 2 weeks notice beforehand. I think this might be why the new combat system may have fallen under the radar for most people. The new games don't really challenge you enough to find out how fun the combat can be. But to my mind, the new games in the series are still way more challenging and infinitely more satisfying than, well, this. I'm just gonna come right out and say it. I hated the way that parkour worked in the old games. Old school AC was so concerned with making parkour look good, they forced players into long, uninterruptible animations, so I personally never felt like I had full control over the character whilst I was free-running. A game should make you feel like you are the main character, but old school Assassin's Creed always made me feel like I was just passing on instructions. This often resulted in my character doing something I didn't want them to do, which sometimes caused me to fail objectives. Oh, chasing someone across rooftops, are we? I think I'll just grab on to this random thing you didn't even notice. Or trying to infiltrate this fort, are we? Look, a platform I can jump to. Oh well, never mind that. Into the sea I go. Ubisoft had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 games to figure this out. 10! And every single one of them had the same fucking problems! Sorry. So what did Ubisoft eventually do? They went back to basics. Press A to ascend, press B to descend. The animations are still beautiful, but now, unlike before, they're designed to work even if the player suddenly wants to stop or change direction. So in Origins, I admit, the unique feel of AC parkour was gone. But for the first time in the series, I finally felt like I was in control when I was leaping across rooftops. Parkour might not be as unique as it was before, but I much prefer a straightforward mechanic that does what you tell it to do over a unique mechanic that makes me want to jump out of a fucking window for real. I'll admit, a big part of why I like the new games is that I'm just a huge fan of open-world action RPGs. However, whenever I see an established franchise shoehorning RPG mechanics into a formula that never needed them, I usually hate it. This is because the addition of RPG mechanics usually results in a game's quality of life taking a huge dive. We all know that Origins completely removed the insta-kill function of the Hidden Blade, and we all know Odyssey can be grindy as hell. But I would argue that the new AC games also add a ton of little quality of life improvements to balance it out. So much so, I think they actually have some of the best quality of life in the series, if not the entire genre. Here's some examples. You can climb almost anything, so you're never vertically restricted. If you aim at an enemy with your bow, you can see how much damage your arrow is going to do. When you sneak near an enemy, you can see how much damage a stealth attack will do. When you're riding your horse, you can switch to autopilot so you can go to your next objective while looking around at the beautiful scenery. You can respec your character at any time from the progression menu at the cost of gold, and you can respec your abilities and stats separately. When you loot one enemy, you automatically loot all the enemies in containers nearby, which is fine because Odyssey limits the inventory by size rather than by weight. Plus, you can dismantle weapons and armor pieces you don't want from your inventory menu. You can also have up to 5 different equipment loadouts and switch between them pretty much whenever you like. I usually don't like loot-driven RPGs, but combined with this feature, having most stats tied to loot allows you to switch between vastly different character builds at will. Why don't more RPGs do this? You can also change the appearance of any weapon or armor piece to look like any of the other ones you've discovered for free. This means you never have to compromise the look of your character for the stats you want, and vice versa. Again, why don't more RPGs do this? If anything, I feel the new AC games take convenience a little too far. There's the no fall damage thing, the eagle flying like a drone thing, the fact that you can pay off bounties from the map menu. I think these things actually make the game too convenient. I would actually prefer if the game was more challenging and less grindy. Despite this though, I feel that the past 2 Assassin's Creed games have included plenty of quality of life features that tons of other open world RPGs would definitely benefit from. In old school AC games, you'd get very specific objectives. If you didn't do these objectives exactly how the game wanted you to do them, you failed. The game fools you into thinking you have freedom by giving you optional objectives, but in reality, you'll pretty much be doing the same things in the exact same order every time you play this mission. There's always a specific path laid out for you, and if you stray from it, you'll likely get spotted or lose your target. Now, admittedly, there are plenty of games that ask you to do very specific things in a very specific way, but those kinds of games usually aren't open world. In the new games, you have so much player freedom, it's crazy. Take this one side mission I just picked up, win battles for Sparta across Greece. Now in Odyssey, conquest battles pop up by themselves now and again, so if I wanted to, I could just wait for one to pop up and then win it to complete the objective. However, if I wanted to be more proactive, as I often do, I could hurry that process along by single-handedly destabilizing one of the many nations in the Greek world. To do that, I could loot a nation chest which contains most of their gold. I could also burn war supplies or food silos. All of these things I could potentially do without alerting a single enemy. Or, if I wanted to, I could just go in sword swinging and take everyone out. Or, if I was role-playing as a pacifistic character, I could just knock everyone out. I could even recruit them to my ship.
Go to port. A man named Varnavas is hiring sailors for my crew.
Or if I really wanted to speed things up, I could go and assassinate the nation leader. I could do so in the fortress where they spend most of their day, or I could wait for the leader to return to their home, which is much less fortified. Or if I wanted to, I could just do none of those things and just kill or recruit dozens of soldiers in that nation, weakening it that way. See how much choice I have to complete this one objective? That's the kind of player agency that makes open world gameplay meaningful. The whole point of an open world game is to give players a sense of freedom. The old games didn't concern themselves with freedom because they were heavily scripted, so the fact that they were open world was honestly kind of pointless. In my opinion, the old AC games probably would have been better games if they weren't open world at all, just linear action adventures like the Uncharted games, which I also love. However, it would have been a waste because one of Ubisoft's strengths has always been how beautifully they bring these historical settings to life. Nowadays, though, not only are these settings more wondrous to explore than ever, they've finally become an integral part of Assassin's Creed's gameplay. The bottom line is this: the new AC games reward players for being creative and doing things their own way, while the old games actually kind of punished you for doing that. This leads me directly to my next and most important point. When I imagine being an assassin in a video game, I imagine being dangerous, not necessarily because I'm the toughest person in the room, but because I'm the smartest. I imagine taking out targets in a variety of ways: blades, poison, or maybe even something that makes it look like an accident. But my greatest weapon would be the plan, perfectly formulated and executed, so no one even knows I was there. My targets never knowing when, where, or how I'll appear. All they know is that when I do, it's already too late. Yeah, the game I just described to you is called Hitman. I have a theory that the original pitch for Assassin's Creed sounded something like this. It's like Hitman, but with historical settings, and you can climb up buildings. Okay, all jokes aside, doesn't that sound fucking amazing? Hitman through time, I would play the shit out of that. My argument is, when did Ubisoft ever even come close to making something that felt like that? The first few Assassin's Creed games have you play as a whiny bartender, reliving the memories of charming Lotharios who are somehow psychic, saving the world from sci-fi MacGuffins that give people laser powers and super strength. Hey, you know what I don't think of when I imagine playing as an assassin? Any of that shit! I'm not saying the stories were bad, they just had nothing to do with the fantasy of being an assassin, and I would argue the gameplay didn't either. Like I mentioned before, missions are very scripted. This is the exact opposite of what games like Hitman try to achieve. When Hitman games give players a target to assassinate, they encourage players to be creative and figure out their own solutions. But all the options require observation, preparation, and execution. It's not just a choice between stabbing somebody over here and stabbing somebody over there. To me, the fantasy of being an assassin goes hand in hand with player freedom and challenge, figuring out the best approach and feeling like no one but you can pull it off. I personally don't understand it when people say that the old AC games fulfill some kind of assassin fantasy. Can hiding between two guys even be called social stealth when other games let you disguise yourself as a bartender and actually mix drinks to blend into the crowd? If I want to play as an assassin and feel like an assassin, I don't play Assassin's Creed. I play Hitman, I play Dishonored, I play Ghost of Tsushima, games that have player freedom, challenge, and are actually about the main character being a good assassin. That last one's even set in medieval Japan, an era that AC fans have been begging to explore. This is the old school Assassin's Creed game I always wanted, if I'm perfectly honest. Think about it for a second. What's your favorite old school Assassin's Creed game? I'm betting most of you picked Black Flag, and if not, it's probably still one of your favorites, right? While I can't speak for everyone, the reason I like that game more than the others is because the protagonist, Edward Kenway, isn't even an assassin. He's a pirate. But since the game had awesome ship combat mechanics, you actually feel like a pirate when you play it. Looking back, this is what the teams behind Assassin's Creed have always been good at. Not making you feel like an assassin, but rather making their historical settings fun and interesting. A big part of that is being able to play as a legendary warrior from either the real-life history or the mythology of the time. Odyssey was advertised as a game where you get to play as a Spartan, and while that is true, more importantly, it turns out... Oh, wait. It turns out you're playing as a demigod. And when you play Odyssey, you feel like a demigod because the game gives you actual superpowers to play with. After Ubisoft Quebec finished up work on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they announced that they were working on yet another open-world RPG set in ancient Greece. The team was tasked with creating a completely new franchise, and they chose the same genre and the same setting. To me, this is really strong evidence that this is the kind of game the developers actually want to make. If you can take just one thing away from this video, let it be this. I know the new AC games don't make you feel like an assassin, but personally, I never felt like the old games did either. That's probably because the devs were more passionate about bringing parts of history to life than making a mechanically satisfying stealth game, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're one of those people who misses the old Assassin's Creed, I get it. I would hate for a franchise I love to change beyond recognition. But when I see people trying to argue that the new games are somehow objectively bad, trying to pass off their own personal qualms as bad design decisions or game-breaking problems, what I actually hear them saying is, I miss games that play themselves for me. I miss games where I feel like a badass because of the way my character was animated rather than how I was challenged. I miss games that just tell me what to do so I don't have to be creative. I miss the days when the devs at Ubisoft weren't allowed to make the kinds of games they're actually passionate about so they can keep making the same games with the same problems every year. Personally, I don't feel bad at all knowing that Assassin's Creed is leaving those kinds of fans behind. But to be completely honest, I made this whole last video because I get butthurt when I see people hate on games that I love. What about you? Did I make you butthurt by hating on games that you love, or do you agree with me and think that Assassin's Creed is better now than it ever was? Let me know, and more importantly, let everyone else know in the comments below. If you liked this video or at least found it interesting, please consider giving me a like and subscribing, as that would really help me out. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to get notified when I upload something new. Thank you ever so much for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you again soon. Take care.